The war council gathered in Zhou Yu's command tent as the sun set behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of blood and amber. 20 officers crowded around the central table where a map of the Yangtze had been spread, weighted down at the corners by stones. Lu Su, Zhou Yu's most trusted advisor, stood to his right, his weathered face creased with concern. Gan Ning, the reformed river pirate whose loyalty was as fierce as his temper, lounged against a tent pole, playing with the hilt of his blade. Generals Cheng Pu, Ding Feng, and Xu Sheng represented the veteran core of Wu's military, while Zhao Yun and a handful of other officers stood for the Shu alliance. And there, at the far end of the tent, stood Huang Gai, straight-backed, despite his years, his gray beard neatly trimmed, his eyes steady and clear. Zhao Yu studied them all, these men who would live or die by his decisions. Outside, he could hear the camp settling into its evening routines, the clatter of cookpots, the low murmur of conversation, the nervous laughter of soldiers trying to keep fear at bay. The smell of rice and fish drifted through the tent flaps, mixing with the sharper scents of lamp oil and river water. "Gentlemen," Zhao Yu began, his voice cutting through the ambient noise with practiced authority, "in 3 days we will attack Cao Cao's fleet. Not probe it, not harass it, attack it with the intent to destroy it completely. I'm not interested in hearing why this is impossible. I'm only interested in hearing how we will make it happen." The tent erupted in a cacophony of voices. Cheng Pu, the eldest, raised immediate objections about the wind direction. Gan Ning wanted to know how many ships they would commit. Others questioned the intelligence reports about Cao Cao's defenses, the reliability of their supply lines, the readiness of their own troops. Zhao Yu let them argue for exactly 1 minute, watching their faces, gauging who would follow and who would need further convincing. Then he slammed his palm down on the table with enough force to make the stones jump. "Enough!" The word cut through the noise like a blade. "Master Zhuge has assured me that the wind will change to blow from the east in exactly 3 days. We will use fire ships to attack Cao Cao's chained fleet. At dawn on the 3rd day, General Huang Gai will lead the fire ship assault, posing as a defector. The rest of our fleet will follow once the blaze is established. That is the plan. Now we discuss only execution." The silence that followed was profound. Every eye in the tent turned to Huang Gai, who had not moved, had not changed expression. The old general simply nodded once, a gesture of acceptance that carried the weight of a funeral rite. "Master Zhuge, you're asking us to stake everything on the wind changing. If it doesn't, then we lose," Zhao Yu interrupted flatly. "But we're already losing. Cao Cao has more men, more supplies, more ships. He controls the north bank, and his scouts probe our positions daily. Every day we wait, he grows stronger and we grow weaker. This is our moment, our only moment. We seize it or we surrender to the inevitable." Zhuge Liang had remained silent throughout, his fan moving in lazy arcs as if he were attending a poetry reading rather than a war council. Now he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a bell. "The mechanics are simple, Zhuge. General Wang will sail 20 ships loaded with dried reeds, oil and sulfur, covered with cloth and topped with kindling. He will claim to be defecting with supplies and munitions, a believable story given that we will stage a very public punishment of the general for advocating surrender." "A punishment?" Cheng Pu asked, confused. Zhao Yu felt his stomach tighten. This was the part of the plan he liked least, the necessary theater that would sell the deception. Tomorrow, at the midday meal, General Wang will again advocate for surrender in front of the assembled troops. I will have him beaten. 100 strokes. Enough to be visible to Cao Cao scouts, enough to appear legitimate. The shock that rippled through the tent was palpable. Huang Gai would be publicly humiliated, physically harmed, all to sell a lie to Cao Cao's intelligence network. It was a brutal calculus, the kind of sacrifice that separated legendary victories from ordinary defeats. "I volunteer," Huang Gai said simply, as if he were volunteering for guard duty rather than torture and probable death. "The plan requires authenticity. My wounds must be real, my resentment believable. After the beating, I will write to Cao Cao, offering to defect with ships and munitions. His spies will report seeing my punishment. He will believe." "And when you sail into his fleet," Gan Ning asked, his voice rough with emotion, "how will you escape?" Huang Gai smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "I won't need to escape. My final service to Wu is to sail those ships into Cao Cao's heart and light the flame that saves the kingdom. What happens after is of no concern." No, the word came from Zhou Yu, the young Shu general who rarely spoke in council. He stepped forward, his bearing that of a man who had seen too much death to tolerate waste. "You will have an escape plan. General Wang, you are too valuable to throw away on a suicide mission. General Zhao, I volunteer to lead a small boat squadron that will follow the fire ships. Once the flames are lit, we extract General Wang if possible." Zhao Yun studied Zhao Yun with new respect. The Shu warrior had a reputation for impossible rescues, for retrieving men from situations that should have killed them. If anyone could pull Zhao Gai from the jaws of Cao Cao's fleet while it burned, it would be him. "Agreed," Zhao Yu said. "But General Wang, you light those fires whether rescue is possible or not. The mission is paramount." "Understood," Zhao Yu said, and Zhao Yu saw in the old general's eyes the clear-sighted acceptance of a man who had already made peace with death. The rest of the council session dealt with logistics: which ships, how much oil, the positioning of the main fleet, the signal flags that would coordinate the attack. They worked late into the night, and by the time the officers finally dispersed, Zhao Yu felt as if he had aged a decade. The weight of the plan, of the lives depending on its success, pressed down on him until breathing felt like a conscious effort. Only Zhuge Liang remained after the others left. He stood by the tent entrance, silhouetted against the campfires outside, his expression unreadable. "You disapprove?" Zhuge Liang said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Of which part?" Zhao Yu asked, pouring himself a cup of wine with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion. "The part where we rely on your weather prediction, the part where we torture a loyal general to sell a deception, or the part where we gamble 2 kingdoms on fire and wind?" "All of it, I suspect," Zhu Die said with that maddening serenity. "You're a man of direct action, Commander Zhao. You prefer the clean mathematics of troop movements and supply lines. This plan offends your sense of order because it requires faith in the weather, in human psychology, in the willingness of men to sacrifice themselves for something larger than survival." "Philosophy," Zhao Yu muttered. "Easy words from a man who won't be leading the attack." "Won't I?" Zhuge Liang moved closer, and Zhao Yu saw that beneath the calm exterior there was steel. "I'm staking my reputation, my kingdom's future, and my own life on this plan, just as surely as you are. If the wind doesn't blow, Shu falls with Wu. We're bound together now, Commander, whether you like it or not." "And if we succeed?" Zhao Yu asked. "What then? Shu and Wu share the spoils equally? Or do we simply delay the inevitable until you and I are at each other's throats?" Zhuge Liang's smile was enigmatic. "One war at a time, Commander Zhao. First, we burn Cao Cao's fleet. Then we worry about the peace." He left without waiting for a response, his footsteps fading into the night sounds of the camp. Zhao Yu sat alone in the tent for a long time after that, staring at the map, at the tiny markers representing hundreds of thousands of lives. Somewhere across the river, Cao Cao was making his own plans, confident in his superior numbers, in his manifest destiny of his conquest. The great general had never known defeat, not truly. He had crushed every warlord who opposed him, absorbed every territory, intimidated every rival into submission or alliance. But fire, Zhou Yu thought. Fire respected neither numbers nor reputation. Fire consumed everything with equal hunger. The question was whether we could deliver it to the right target at the right time.
The river ran black under the winter sky, its surface reflecting nothing but the gathering dread that hung over the encampment like a shroud. Zhou Yu stood at the edge of the cliff, his silk robes whipping in the bitter northern wind, and watched the distant lights of Cao Cao's fleet glitter across the Yangtze like a constellation fallen to earth. 800,000 men, they said. Perhaps it was an exaggeration. Perhaps not. What did numbers matter when you could see their campfires stretch to the horizon, when the very weight of their presence seemed to bend the river itself? Behind him, the Wu camp stirred with the anxious energy of men who knew they were outmatched. 50,000 soldiers, perhaps 60 if you counted the combined forces of Wu and their reluctant allies from Shu, a minnow facing a whale. Zhou Yu's jaw tightened as he calculated distances, wind patterns, the depth of the river channels. His mind was a battlefield unto itself, where strategies clashed and died before they could even be spoken aloud. "Commander Zhu." The voice was quiet but carried the weight of conviction. Zhou Yu didn't turn. He recognized the voice of Zhuge Liang, the brilliant strategist from Shu who had arrived 3 months ago with promises of alliance and plans within plans. The man was insufferable, always 3 steps ahead in conversation, always holding back some crucial piece of information until the perfect dramatic moment. Yet Zhou Yu couldn't deny his genius, even as it grated against his own considerable pride. "The wind still blows from the north," Zhou Yu said flatly. "It has blown from the north for 40 days without change. Tell me, Master Zhuge, can your clever calculations alter the very seasons?" Zhuge Liang stepped beside him, his crane feather fan folded against his chest despite the cold. Where Zhou Yu was all sharp edges and barely controlled intensity, Zhuge Liang seemed to float through the world with an infuriating serenity. He was younger than Zhou Yu by 5 years, yet carried himself with the calm of a man who had already seen how the story would end. "The winter monsoon is strong," Zhuge Liang agreed, his breath misting in the frigid air. "But nature, like men, has its patterns, its rhythms, and rhythms can be read by those who know how to listen." He paused, and Zhou Yu got the faint smile at the corner of his mouth. "The wind will change, Commander Zhu. In 3 days, the east wind will blow." Zhou Yu's hand moved to the hilt of his sword, not in threat, but in frustration. "You speak in riddles while Cao Cao's forces grow stronger by the hour. His northern troops sicken on our southern waters, yes, but he's chained his ships together, creating a stable platform. They drill, they train, they prepare, and we stand here talking about wind and waiting for miracles." "Not a miracle," Zhuge Liang said softly. "A calculation. The stars align, Commander Zhu. The temperature differential between land and water reaches its critical point as we approach the solstice. Warm air rising over the land, cold air descending over the water. The physics are inevitable. The east wind will come." He turned to face Zhou Yu directly, and for once there was no smugness in his expression, only a fierce certainty that burned like cold fire. The question is not whether the wind will blow. The question is whether we will be ready when it does." For a long moment, the two men stood in silence, the fate of kingdoms hanging in the space between them. Zhou Yu was known throughout the Southlands as a military prodigy, a man who had won battles against impossible odds through sheer force of tactical brilliance. But he was also proud, and pride could be a blade that cut both ways. To accept Zhuge Liang's plan meant trusting this outsider, this representative of the smaller Shu kingdom who had arrived with grand promises, but precious few soldiers to back them up. Yet what choice did they have? Cao Cao controlled the north, had conquered province after province in his inexorable march toward total dominance. The great general claimed to act in the name of the Han Emperor, but everyone knew the emperor was a puppet and Cao Cao the true power behind the throne. If he crossed the Yangtze, if his massive army gained a foothold in the south, then Wu would fall within months. And after Wu, Shu would be nothing more than a footnote in Cao Cao's empire. "Tell me the plan again," Zhou Yu said finally, his voice low and measured. "If we are to stake everything on this gambit, I need to understand it completely." Zhuge Liang's eyes glinted with something that might have been respect. He unfolded his fan with a practiced flick and began to speak in that calm, measured tone that made even the most outlandish stratagems sound like inevitable truths. "Cao Cao's greatest strength is also his fatal weakness," Zhuge Liang began. "He has chained his ships together to provide stability for his northern troops who suffer from seasickness on the water. This creates a vast, interconnected platform, impressive, intimidating, seemingly impregnable. But it also means that if one ship burns, they all burn. The chains that give them strength will become the chains that trap them." Zhou Yu nodded slowly. He had observed the same thing, had entertained similar thoughts, but the execution seemed impossible. Fire ships. You're proposing fire ships, but the wind blows north, driving any burning vessel back toward our own lines. And even if your predicted east wind arrives, getting burning ships into position without Cao Cao's archers cutting down our pilots would require— "A defector," Zhuge Liang interrupted smoothly. "Someone Cao Cao trusts. Someone who can sail directly into the heart of his fleet without suspicion, carrying ships laden with oil and kindling, waiting for the precise moment when the wind changes." "Who would be foolish enough to volunteer for such a mission?" Zhou Yu meandered. "The moment those ships ignite, they'll be trapped in the center of Cao Cao's fleet, burned alive or shot by arrows while trying to escape. It's a death sentence." "Then we need someone who has nothing left to lose," Zhuge Liang said quietly. "Or someone who values honor above survival." The name hung unspoken between them, but Zhou Yu knew who Zhuge Liang meant. Huang Gai, the veteran general who had served the Sun family for 3 generations, who wore his loyalty like armor and his scars like medals. Huang Gai, who had suggested the very same plan in council 3 nights ago and been shouted down by younger, more cautious officers. "He's 60 years old," Zhou Yu protested. But as he spoke, he knew the decision had already been made. Perhaps had been made weeks ago, in whatever elaborate mental chess game Zhuge Liang had been playing. "He's 60 years old. We're asking him to die." "We're asking him to save 2 kingdoms," Zhuge Liang corrected gently. "And he has already volunteered. The question is whether you, as commander, will accept his sacrifice." The weight of leadership settled on Zhou Yu's shoulders like a physical thing. This was what command meant, not the glory of victory parades or the adulation of crowds, but the terrible calculus of deciding whose lives to spend and for what purpose. He thought of his wife Dao Chao, waiting in Chaisang, beautiful and brilliant, and terrified though she tried to hide it. He thought of the thousands of soldiers in the camp below, farm boys and fishermen pressed into service, men who trusted him to lead them wisely. He thought of the millions of people across Wu and Shu who would be enslaved or slaughtered if Cao Cao crossed the river. "Call a war council," Zhou Yu said finally. "We have 3 days to prepare. If the wind doesn't change—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. "The wind will change," Zhuge Liang said with maddening certainty. "Be ready, Commander Zhu. History is watching."
The sun rose cold and pale on the morning of Huang Gai's punishment, casting long shadows across the parade ground where Zhou Yu had assembled nearly every soldier in camp. The men stood in tight formation, their breath misting in the winter air, confusion and anxiety written on their faces. They had been pulled from breakfast without explanation, ordered to witness something they had been told was of critical importance to their survival. Zhou Yu stood on a raised platform at the front of the assembly, his formal armor gleaming, his face an expressionless mask. Lu Su stood beside him, holding a scroll. Behind them, a sturdy wooden frame had been erected, and next to it, 2 soldiers held canes meant for punishment. And in front of the platform, standing alone in the center of a wide circle of empty ground, was Huang Gai. The old general wore simple robes, his gray hair unbound, his posture straight despite the humiliation of what was to come. His face was calm, almost peaceful, as if he were attending a meditation session rather than his own degradation. Zhou Yu let the silence stretch, let the tension build until it was nearly unbearable. Then he nodded to Lu Su, who unrolled the scroll and began to read in a voice that carried across the assembly. "General Huang Gai stands accused of defeatism and sedition. 3 times in council, he has advocated for surrender to Cao Cao. 3 times he has argued that our cause is hopeless and that we should submit to the Northern Army rather than fight. Such counsel, offered before junior officers and common soldiers, undermines morale and threatens the cohesion of our defense. The penalty for such defeatism is 100 strokes of the cane." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Huang Gai was beloved by the troops, respected for his decades of service. The idea of punishing him seemed wrong, almost sacrilegious. Zhou Yu saw doubt and anger on the faces below him and knew that was exactly the reaction they needed. Cao Cao's spies, certainly present among the camp followers and laborers, would report this scene with all its emotional resonance. "General Huang," Zhou Yu said, his voice cold and formal, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Huang Gai lifted his head, and when he spoke his voice carried the timbre of a man who had accepted his fate. "I spoke my conscience, Commander Zhao. I still believe that we cannot win against Cao Cao's numbers. A wise leader preserves his men's lives rather than spending them on hopeless causes. If that makes me a defeatist, then I am guilty as charged." The words were perfect, hitting exactly the right notes of stubborn conviction and veiled criticism. Zhou Yu felt a twist of admiration for the old general's performance, even as he prepared to order his punishment. "Strip his back," Zhou Yu commanded. 2 soldiers stepped forward hesitantly, helping Huang Gai remove his outer robe and undershirt. The general's torso was crisscrossed with the scars of a lifetime of service, blade wounds, arrow gouges, the puckered burn marks from some long-ago fire. Now they would add cane stripes to that map of loyalty and sacrifice. Huang Gai was bound to the frame, his arms stretched wide, his back exposed. The soldier with the cane looked up at Zhou Yu with pleading eyes, clearly hoping for a reprieve that wouldn't come. Zhou Yu's face remained impassive, though inside he felt something cold and sick coiling in his gut. He ordered, "Begin." The first strike landed with a crack that seemed unnaturally loud in the cold morning air. Huang Gai's body jerked, but he made no sound. The second strike followed, then the third. By the 10th stroke, blood began to seep through the welts rising on the general's back. By the 20th, the hardest veterans in the assembly were looking away, unable to watch. But Huang Gai never cried out, not once. He bore the punishment with the same stoic dignity he had brought to every battle, every hardship, every moment of his long service. His silence was more eloquent than any speech, more powerful than any declaration. It spoke of a man who had made his choice and would see it through regardless of cost. When the 100th stroke finally fell, Huang Gai hung limp in his bonds, his back a mass of blood and torn flesh. Soldiers rushed forward to cut him down and carry him to the medical tent. Zhou Yu descended from the platform and walked directly to where Huang Gai lay on the stretcher, the general's breathing shallow and labored. "I'm sorry," Zhou Yu whispered, knowing the words were inadequate, but needing to say them anyway. Huang Gai's eyes flickered open, and impossibly he smiled. "Don't be. We needed to sell the performance. I'd say we succeeded." Then the physicians carried him away, and Zhou Yu was left standing alone in the parade ground as the assembly dispersed in troubled silence. He could feel the weight of their judgment, their confusion, their anger. Good. Let them doubt him. Let them whisper about his cruelty, his poor judgment. Let the spies report every syllable of their discontent. That night, as Zhou Yu knew he would, Huang Gai dictated a letter to Cao Cao. It spoke of humiliation and betrayal, of serving faithfully for decades only to be rewarded with public torture. It offered to defect with 20 supply ships, claiming they contained rice and munitions but would actually be loaded with soldiers loyal to Huang Gai who would turn on Cao Cao's fleet from within. It was a plausible story, made believable by the very real wounds on Huang Gai's back. The letter was smuggled out by a merchant sympathetic to Wu, but known to have contacts in Cao Cao's camp. Within 2 days, the response came back. Cao Cao accepted the defection, welcomed Huang Gai's ships, and promised the general a position of honor in the new order that would follow Wu's inevitable surrender. The trap was set. Now they only needed the wind.
On the evening of the second day, Zhou Yu stood once more on the cliff overlooking the river. But this time he was not alone. Zhuge Liang had joined him, along with several other officers who had been unable to sleep, drawn by anxiety and anticipation to this high place where they could watch the northern shore and imagine what the next dawn might bring. The wind still blew from the north, cold and steady, mocking their plans. "Tomorrow is the day you predicted," Zhou Yu said, not looking at Zhuge Liang. "Tomorrow at dawn the east wind is supposed to arrive. What happens if it doesn't?" "Then I will have been wrong," Zhuge Liang said simply. "And you will have every right to throw me into the river." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Zhuge Liang's fan moved in slow arcs, and Zhou Yu noticed for the first time that the strategist's hand trembled slightly. So even the serene Zhuge Liang felt pressure, felt doubt. Somehow that was reassuring. "I've calculated, based on seasonal patterns, astronomical observations, the behavior of birds and insects, the temperature of the river versus the land. Every indicator points to a shift in the wind. But nature is not an army that follows orders. There's always uncertainty." "Uncertainty," Zhou Yu repeated bitterly. "We're betting 2 kingdoms on uncertainty." We're betting them on patterns, Zhuge Liang corrected. On the fundamental forces that govern our world. The same forces that make rivers flow downhill and seasons turn. I'm as certain as a man can be about such things. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the distant lights of Cao Cao's fleet. Zhou Yu tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. The flames, the screaming, the desperate scramble as thousands of men tried to escape burning ships chained together. War was always chaos, but what they were planning was chaos weaponized, chaos as strategy. "Do you ever feel guilt," Zhou Yu asked abruptly, "about the men who will die tomorrow? Not just Cao Cao's men, though they'll die by the thousands, but our own. The sailors who will guide the fire ships, the soldiers who will follow up the attack. Do you ever think about their families, their dreams, all the things they'll never do because we decided they needed to die today?" Zhuge Liang was quiet for so long that Zhou Yu thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Zhou Yu had ever heard it. "Every day," Zhuge Liang said, "I think about them every single day. The weight of command is not the glory of victory or the strategy of battle. It's the knowledge that your decisions end lives, destroy families, orphan children. I carry every death on my conscience, and there are nights when that weight feels like it will crush me." Zhou Yu glanced at the strategist in surprise. He had never heard Zhuge Liang speak with such raw honesty, such vulnerability. "But the alternative," Zhuge Liang continued, "is to do nothing, to let Cao Cao march south unopposed, to watch kingdoms fall and millions enslaved because we were too paralyzed by moral qualms to make hard choices. So yes, I feel guilt, but I choose to feel it, to carry it, to let it remind me that these strategies we devise so cleverly are not abstract games. They are blood and bone, suffering and loss. And if we win tomorrow, I will spend the rest of my life trying to build something worthy of that sacrifice." Zhou Yu found himself nodding slowly. Perhaps he and Zhuge Liang weren't so different after all. Perhaps their rivalry, their mutual irritation, sprang not from opposition, but from recognition. Two men who understood the terrible burden of leadership and resented seeing that understanding reflected in the other's eyes. "If we survive tomorrow," Zhou Yu said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been hostile, skeptical, dismissive. You're—" He paused, forcing out the words. "You're a brilliant strategist and a decent man. Wu is fortunate to have you as an ally." Zhuge Liang's smile was genuine this time, without a trace of smugness. "And Shu is fortunate to have Wu's navy and Commander Zhao's tactical genius. Together, we're stronger than either kingdom alone. That's worth remembering, regardless of what tomorrow brings." They turned together, heading back down the cliff path toward the camp. Behind them, the wind still blew from the north, but now Zhou Yu found himself believing, truly believing, that it would change. Not because mystic certainty or blind faith, but because he had seen Zhuge Liang's calculations, understood the logic behind them, and recognized the rigorous intelligence that had produced them. The wind would change, and when it did, they would be ready.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Zhou Yu didn't sleep that night. Instead, he made rounds through the camp, visiting each unit, speaking quietly with officers and common soldiers alike. He found Zhou Yun checking his rescue boats, ensuring every line was coiled properly, every oar positioned for maximum speed. He found Gan Ning sharpening his sword with methodical precision, the rasp of stone on steel a meditation. He found the young sailors who would pilot the support ships, barely more than boys, trying to hide their fear behind bravado. He found Huang Gai in the medical tent,
the general sitting up despite the physician's protests, his back wrapped in bandages, but his eyes clear and focused. "Can you sail?" Zhou Yu asked without preamble. Huang Gai stood, wincing slightly but moving with determination. "I can do what needs to be done, Commander. The pain is irrelevant." Zhou Yu wanted to argue, wanted to call off the plan or at least substitute another officer, but he knew it was impossible. Only Huang Gai had the credibility to sell the defection. Only he had the reputation that would make Cao Cao lower his guard. And only he had the sheer stubborn courage to see it through. "When you light the fires," Zhou Yu said carefully, "don't wait too long. Light them and run. Don't be a hero." Huang Gai laughed, a short bark of sound. "Commander, I've been a soldier for 40 years. I stopped being a hero sometime around my first arrow wound. Tomorrow I'm just an old man doing his job. No poetry, no glory, just work that needs doing." "The kingdom will remember you," Zhou Yu promised. "The kingdom won't know I existed," Huang Gai countered. "And that's fine. I'm not doing this for statues or songs. I'm doing it because I've eaten Wu's rice and worn Wu's uniform and taken Wu's coin for 4 decades. Tomorrow is just me paying my debts." Zhou Yu gripped the old general's shoulder, careful to avoid the wounded back, and found he couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. So he simply nodded and left, trusting that Huang Gai understood all the things he couldn't say. As midnight approached, Zhou Yu finally returned to his own tent. He tried to rest, to conserve energy for the battle ahead, but sleep was impossible. His mind raced through every contingency, every possible failure point in their plan. What if Cao Cao suspected the trap? What if the ships were inspected too carefully? What if the wind changed but brought rain that would douse their fires? What if? Sometime in the deepest part of the night, when the darkness seemed absolute and the cold had seeped into his very bones, Zhou Yu felt it. The subtlest shift in air pressure, the barest change in temperature. He stepped outside his tent and stood very still, hardly daring to breathe. The wind had stopped. For perhaps 10 minutes, maybe 15, the air was perfectly, unnaturally still. The banners in the camp hung limp. The tent flaps ceased their constant flutter. Even the river seemed to pause, holding its breath. And then, so gently at first that Zhou Yu thought he might be imagining it, the wind began to blow again. From the east, warm, moist air rolling in from the ocean, carrying with it the scent of salt and distant storms. Zhuge Liang had been right. Zhou Yu threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure relief and wild exhilaration that rang through the silent camp. Within moments, other men emerged from their tents, feeling the change, understanding its significance. Fires were stoked back to life. Orders were shouted. The entire camp erupted into controlled chaos as officers scrambled to their positions and soldiers rushed to their assigned tasks. The east wind had come. The moment had arrived. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Yangtze River, the sky lightening from black to gray to the palest blue. Zhou Yu stood on the deck of his flagship, surrounded by his officers, watching as Huang Gai's 20 ships slipped their moorings and began to make their way downriver toward Cao Cao's fleet. The fire ships looked innocent enough from a distance, merchant vessels, slightly battered, their decks piled with what appeared to be supplies covered by canvas. Only those who knew what lay beneath could see the truth. Bundles of dried reeds soaked in oil, pots of sulfur and pitch, anything that would burn hot and fast. Each ship had a skeleton crew of 2 men, a pilot to guide it into position and an assistant to help with the sails. Once they reached Cao Cao's fleet, those men would light the fires and dive overboard, trusting to Zhou Yun's rescue boats to pull them from the water before arrows found them or flames consumed them. Huang Gai stood on the lead ship, visible even from this distance by his distinctive gray beard and the careful way he held himself to minimize the pain from his back. He insisted on sailing the lead ship personally, claiming that Cao Cao would expect the defecting general to be prominently visible. Zhou Yu suspected the real reason was that Huang Gai wanted to ensure the fires were properly set, that if anyone was going to die making sure the plan succeeded, it would be him. The wind held steady from the east, filling the fire ship's sails and pushing them swiftly toward their target. Cao Cao's fleet was stirring now, morning watch noticing the approaching vessels. There would be confusion at first, friendlies or enemies. Then recognition, as Cao Cao's officers identified the flags, noted the appearance of supply ships, perhaps even spotted Huang Gai himself through distance viewing tubes. Signal flags from Cao Cao's fleet, Lu Su reported, his voice tense. They're welcoming the ships, opening a corridor through their formation. Zhou Yu felt his heartbeat accelerate. It was working. The deception was holding. Huang Gai's ships glided deeper into Cao Cao's formation, threading between the massive war junks chained together in groups of 10 and 20. The fire ships looked tiny compared to Cao Cao's vessels, insignificant, hardly worth noticing. That would change in approximately 7 minutes. All ships prepare for advance, Zhou Yu ordered, his voice carrying across the water to the signal officers on neighboring vessels. On my command, we follow the fire ships in, not before. Timing is everything. The minutes stretched like hours. Zhou Yu watched through his distance tube as Huang Gai's lead ship penetrated deeper into Cao Cao's formation, followed by the other 19 vessels in staggered formation. They were nearly at the heart of the fleet now, surrounded on all sides by Cao Cao's chained warships. If the fires didn't start soon, if something went wrong, then he saw it. A flicker of flame on Huang Gai's ship, then another. Within seconds, all 20 fire ships were blazing, the oil-soaked reeds catching with explosive fury. The canvas coverings burned away instantly, revealing the inferno beneath. And the east wind, Zhuge Liang's promised east wind, seized those flames and drove them forward with hungry intensity. The first of Cao Cao's ships caught fire almost immediately, the dry wood of its hull igniting as burning debris landed on its deck. The chains that bound it to neighboring ships meant the fire spread rapidly, jumping from ship to ship faster than men could react. Zhou Yu watched soldiers on Cao Cao's decks scramble and panic, some rushing toward the flames with buckets of water, useless against such an inferno, others trying to cut the chains that bound their ships together, realizing too late that those same chains had become death sentences. Now, Zhou Yu roared, all ships advance, attack formation.
Drums thundered across the Wu fleet as war drums signaled the advance. 50 warships surged forward, their crews roaring battle cries, their archers knocking arrows, their marines preparing grappling hooks and boarding equipment. They raced toward Cao Cao's burning fleet like sharks drawn to blood in the water. Through the distance tube, Zhuge Liang searched desperately for some sign of Huang Gai or his crews, but the smoke was too thick now, a black cloud that rose hundreds of feet into the morning sky. Flames danced across what had been the most powerful naval formation ever assembled in China, turning it into a hellscape of burning wood and screaming men. The river itself seemed to be on fire, oil spreading across its surface and igniting, creating a barrier of flame between the burning ships and any potential escape route. Zhou Yu has launched his rescue boats, an officer reported. He's heading into the smoke. Zhou Yu wanted to watch, wanted to see if the brilliant young warrior could pull off the impossible and extract Huang Gai from that inferno, but he had his own responsibilities. His fleet was engaging the outer edges of Cao Cao's formation now, attacking ships that hadn't yet caught fire, but were trapped by the conflagration spreading through the chained vessels. Archers on both sides exchanged volleys, the air thick with arrows. Grappling hooks flew, marines swarmed across rails, steel met steel in close combat. The battle was chaos, but it was chaos working in their favor.
Cao Cao's troops, many of them northern cavalry pressed into naval service, fought bravely but without coordination. Their officers tried to maintain order, but order was impossible when the world was burning around you, when every moment brought fresh screams from nearby ships, when the very chains meant to provide stability had become instruments of doom. Zhou Yu's flagship rammed into a burning vessel, and his marines poured across, securing it quickly before retreating back to their own ship. They weren't trying to capture vessels, merely ensuring that every ship in this section of Cao Cao's fleet was disabled or destroyed. Other Wu ships followed similar tactics, striking fast and hard, then withdrawing before the flames could spread to their own hulls. The smoke was incredible, so thick that visibility dropped to almost nothing. Zhou Yu ordered his ships to mark their positions with specific flag patterns and horn signals to avoid colliding with each other in the chaos. Through gaps in the smoke, he caught glimpses of the devastation, ships listing as their hulls burned through, men throwing themselves into the river to escape the flames, the chained formations collapsing as weakened vessels dragged their neighbors down with them. And through it all, the east wind kept blowing, kept driving the flames forward, kept feeding the inferno that was consuming the greatest fleet China had ever seen. "Commander!" Lu Su shouted over the din. "Zhao Yun's boats are returning!" Zhou Yu spun around, searching the smoke-choked waters behind them. 3 small boats emerged from the gray-black clouds, their hulls scorched, their crews coughing and choking but alive. And in the lead boat, slumped against the mast but definitely breathing, was Huang Gai. Relief crashed through Zhou Yu with physical force. Against all odds, the old general had survived. He had sailed into the heart of an enemy fleet, set fires that would burn in legend for centuries, and somehow made it out alive. "Pull those boats alongside," Zhou Yu ordered. "Get General Huang to the physicians immediately." As Huang Gai's boat came level with the flagship, Zhou Yu saw the full extent of what the general had endured. His bandages were soaked with fresh blood, his face was blackened with soot, and his eyebrows had been singed completely off. But his eyes were clear and alert, and when he saw Zhou Yu looking down at him, he managed a weak salute. "Mission accomplished, Commander," Huang Gai called up, his voice hoarse from smoke. "I trust the results meet expectations." Zhou Yu laughed, surprising himself with the sound. "You magnificent old bastard. Yes, General, I'd say the results are satisfactory." Huang Gai was lifted aboard the flagship and immediately surrounded by physicians. As they carried him below decks, Zhou Yu heard him grumbling about unnecessary fuss, insisting he was fine, demanding to be allowed to return to his command. Even half dead, the general couldn't stop being a soldier. The battle continued for another 3 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. By midday, over half of Cao Cao's fleet had been destroyed. Hundreds of ships were burned to the waterline or sunk entirely. Thousands of soldiers had drowned, burned, or cut down trying to escape. The survivors fled north in disarray, their morale shattered, and their mighty armada reduced to a scattered flotilla of damaged vessels. Zhou Yu called off the pursuit as the sun reached its zenith. His own fleet had suffered casualties, certainly. 2 ships lost, several others damaged, perhaps 300 dead and twice that wounded. But compared to what they had inflicted on Cao Cao, the price was almost insignificant. As the Wu fleet regrouped and began counting their victories, Zhou Yu stood at the rail of his flagship and watched the fires burn. They would burn for days, he knew. Ships would continue to smolder and collapse. Bodies would wash ashore for weeks. The sky would remain darkened by smoke, and the river would run gray with ash. But the Yangtze had held. The South had held, and Cao Cao's dream of total conquest was burned to cinders on this water.
With each retelling, until it became legend, future generations would speak of the fire over the river, of the east wind that changed at the perfect moment, of Huang Gai's sacrifice and Zhuge Liang's brilliant strategy. But Zhou Yu hoped they would also remember the cost
The thousands of lives lost, the young men who would never return home, the families shattered by war. Victory was necessary, even noble, but it was never clean and never without profound moral weight. He thought about his wife, Da Qiao, waiting in Shesang. He should write to her, tell her he had survived, that the battle had been won. But the words felt inadequate, incapable of capturing what he had experienced, what he had learned. How did you explain to someone who loved you that you had ordered men to their deaths and would do so again if circumstances required it? How did you make them understand that leadership meant carrying burdens that could never be fully shared or set down? Instead, he simply wrote, "The battle is won. I am safe. I miss you. I'll come home when I can." Simple words, but honest ones. And sometimes, honesty was the best gift you could give. The following morning, Zhou Yu stood on the cliff one final time, watching Zhuge Liang's detachment depart upriver toward Zhongling. The strategist had gathered his forces, mostly light cavalry and fast boats, perfect for the hit-and-run harassment campaign he was planning. Zhao Yun rode at his side, the two having formed a mutual respect during the rescue operation. "They make quite a pair," Lu Su observed, joining Zhou Yu on the clifftop. "The strategic genius and the warrior saint. Cao Cao will have his hands full." "We all will," Zhou Yu said. "This victory changes the balance of power, but it doesn't end the struggle. Wu, Wei, and Shu will continue their dance, sometimes allies, sometimes enemies, always looking for advantage." "Do you think there will ever be peace?" Lu Su asked. "True peace, not just pauses between conflicts?" Zhou Yu considered the question carefully. The idealist in him wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that eventually wisdom would prevail over ambition, that the kingdoms would find a way to coexist, but the realist, the part shaped by years of warfare and political maneuvering, knew better. "I think there will be moments of peace," he said finally. "Brief periods when exhaustion or mutual advantage creates temporary stability. But lasting peace? That would require all sides to give up their dreams of reunification, to accept a divided China. And I don't see that happening in our lifetimes." A grim assessment, but an honest one, Zhou Yu said. "We've won a great victory, Lu Su. We've bought our kingdom time to breathe, to strengthen, to prepare. But we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking the war is over. The struggle continues. All we've done is ensure that Wu will have a voice in how it ends." Lu Su nodded slowly, accepting the wisdom in Zhou Yu's words. "Then we'd better make the most of the time we've bought. Train our troops, fortify our positions, build our economy. If more conflict is inevitable, we need to be ready for it." "Exactly," Zhou Yu agreed. "And we need to remember the lessons of Red Cliffs. That cleverness beats numbers. That sacrifice sometimes wins what strategy alone cannot. That the right alliance at the right time can change everything." They stood together, watching the last of Zhuge Liang's boats disappear around a bend in the river. The waters had calmed since the battle, the fires finally extinguished, the debris cleared. Soon there would be nothing left to mark where one of history's most dramatic naval battles had taken place. Only stories, memories, and the changed political landscape of China. "Do you think people will remember?" Lu Su asked quietly. 100 years from now, will anyone remember what happened here?" Zhou Yu smiled, thinking of Huang Gai's sacrifice, of Zhuge Liang's calculations, of the thousands of men who had fought and died on both sides. "They'll remember. Not accurately, perhaps. History has a way of becoming legend, and legend becomes myth. But they'll remember that here on this river, a small alliance defeated overwhelming force. They'll remember that cleverness and courage can triumph over numbers.
They'll remember the fire over the river and the east wind that changed everything." "And us?" Lu Su asked. "Will they remember our names?" "Some of them," Zhou Yu said, "the ones who matter. But more importantly, they'll remember what we stood for, that sometimes you have to risk everything to preserve what's worth preserving, that leadership means making impossible choices and living with the consequences, that victory has a price and honorable men pay it willingly when the cause is just." The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the morning mist, promising a clear, cold day. Below them, the Wu camp bustled with renewed purpose. Soldiers drilling, smiths hammering, physicians tending wounded, all the 1,000 tasks required to maintain an army in the field. Life went on, would continue going on, regardless of what battles had been fought or would be fought in the future. Zhou Yu took a deep breath, drawing the cold river air into his lungs, feeling alive in a way he hadn't for months. They had faced impossible odds and prevailed. They had trusted in strategy and wind and human courage, and those things had been enough. Whatever came next, more battles, more sacrifices, more impossible choices, they would face it with the confidence of men who had already accomplished the impossible. "Come," he said to Lu Su, turning away from the river. "We have work to do. Victory won may be celebrated, but victory maintained requires constant effort. And I have reports to review, officers to consult with, and a kingdom to help defend." They walked back down the cliff path together, two men who had witnessed history and were now tasked with building a future worthy of it. Behind them, the river flowed on as it always had and always would, indifferent to human struggles, carrying stories and secrets toward the distant sea. The Battle of Red Cliffs was over, but its consequences would echo through the centuries, shaping the destiny of kingdoms and the dreams of generations yet to be born. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all, not just to win, but to win in a way that mattered, that changed the world, that proved that human ingenuity and courage could triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. The fire had burned, the wind had blown, and China would never be the same.
The wound on Huang Gai's back had healed into a complex landscape of scar tissue, joining the map of previous injuries that covered his body like a living history book. He stood in the training yard, watching young recruits practice formations, his voice sharp and commanding as he corrected their posture and positioning. Zhu Yu, observing from the sidelines, smiled at the sight. The old general had declined retirement, had instead taken charge of training the next generation of Wu officers. His experience, bought with a lifetime of service and sacrifice, was too valuable to waste on a peaceful retirement. "They're getting better," Huang Gai reported, joining Zhu Yu in the shade of a nearby pavilion. "Give me another 6 months and they'll be ready for actual combat. Not that I'm hoping for more war, mind you, but we should always be prepared." "Always be prepared," Zhu Yu echoed. "That's the lesson of Red Cliffs, isn't it? That preparation, strategy, and timing matter as much as numbers or strength." "That and the importance of good allies," Huang Gai added, glancing toward the west where Shu's territory lay. "I don't trust Zhuge Liang, the man's too clever by half, but I respect him, and I'm grateful Wu had him as an ally when it mattered most." News from Jiangling had been promising. Zhuge Liang's harassment campaign had been so effective that Cao Cao had abandoned the position, retreating further north to consolidate his remaining forces. The immediate threat to the south had been neutralized, though everyone knew it was only a matter of time before Cao Cao recovered and tried again. "I received the letter from Master Zhuge Liang yesterday. He's returned to Shu to advise their ruler on defensive preparations. But he sent an interesting message. He believes the three-way balance we've established could last for years, perhaps decades, if all sides recognize that none of them is strong enough to conquer the others."
A three-way stalemate, Huang Gai mused. Not the unified China everyone claims to want, but better than constant warfare. I could live with that. So could I, Zhou Yu admitted. Though try telling that to the ambitious princes and generals who dream of being the one to reunify the empire. They stood together, watching the young soldiers train, knowing that some of them would likely die in future battles, that the peace they had won at Red Cliffs was fragile and temporary. But they also knew that they had changed the course of history, that their actions had created possibilities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The fire over the river had burned away more than ships. It had burned away Cao Cao's invincibility, his aura of inevitable conquest. It had shown that the South could resist, that clever strategy could overcome superior numbers, that sacrifice and courage still mattered in a cynical age of endless warfare. And that, Zhou Yu reflected, was worth remembering, worth preserving, worth all the pain and loss and impossible choices that leadership demanded. The recruits finished their drill and stood at attention, awaiting Huang Gai's assessment. The old general nodded approvingly, then barked out new orders, sending them through a more complex formation. His voice was strong, confident, carrying across the training yard with the authority of experience. Zhou Yu watched and smiled. Some men measured their lives in years or accomplishments. Others measured it in the legacy they left behind, the students they trained, the kingdoms they defended, the stories that would be told about them after they were gone. By that measure, they had all achieved something remarkable at Red Cliffs, something that would be remembered and retold as long as people cared about courage, strategy, and the eternal human struggle against overwhelming odds. The wind blew gentle and warm, carrying the scent of spring blossoms and new growth. The river flowed on toward the sea. And in the training yard of Wu, the next generation of defenders learned from the veterans who had won the impossible victory. The fire over the river had burned bright and fierce, changing everything in its wake. And the world, though scarred and weary, was better for it.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.